The comments on this video are going to make me sound like a prophet of doom. Unfortunately for all of us, that is not the case. In fact, what I'm actually doing is reporting a doomsday scenario that is happening to us right now. I'm calling this disaster the hunger wave because things are going on that will result in food shortages all over the globe. And the main cause for these shortages is too much water. For many, many months in the United States and probably in other parts of the world, we've been experiencing larger than normal amounts of rain. And this has led to a situation in which the ground is too saturated to plant crops. So here's an example from September 21st of 2018, about a year and a half ago. What you see are very heavy patches of rain in some parts of the country. And along with this, one thing we've been noticing is that because the waves in the jet stream are getting taller, that the temperature difference between one side and the other of the various fronts is larger than it's been in the past. And this is leading to a lot more violent weather. And here we see another map from this month that has just ended, and you see them talking about record rainfall, more flash flooding possible, showing with the purple dots where there's flooding on the Mississippi, heavy rain all through the central part of the country. And the result is shown on this map, which is a soil moisture anomaly. And if I'm reading this correctly, if you look at the whole central part of the country and then look at the scale on the side, you see that in large parts of the United States, the amount of soil moisture is easily 100% or more over the average amount. And one of the ways that this is manifesting is this in terms of flooding across vast parts of the country. And if you look at the center right of this picture, it looks like somebody has planted a garden here. That garden's underwater. And here we see the additional kind of damage that's being done in terms of roads and other infrastructure being washed away. So in terms of crops, in some parts of the Midwest we are seeing huge reductions in the amount of corn planted at this time of the year, which is, as you see on the 5-year average, most of the time 90% or so of the corn is planted by now. And this year we are having much less planting. You can see Indiana at 22%, Ohio at 22%, South Dakota at 25%. What happens is that when corn is planted late, you lose a certain amount of production for every day that you are late. And there is also an increased risk because there is the possibility of an early frost at the other end of the growing season. We are seeing similar results in terms of the amount of soybeans that have been planted, a very low percentage compared to last year. And, South Dakota as little as 6%. And I've heard some comments to the effect that if people can't plant corn, they will turn around and plant soybeans. But there again, the window is closing, and you wonder just how fast, for instance, supplies of seed are going to be exhausted. Now, in typical years, farmers have some expectation that if there are problems with the crops, there will be crop insurance to help them handle the financial damage as a result. But this year, because of the extreme delays, we are seeing farmers coming up against a very bad choice, which is basically their fields are mud, and they can do what they call wet planting. But the seed that goes into the ground will possibly rot in the ground or never germinate, or if it does germinate, it will suffocate because the soil is too wet and it can't breathe. So here's a bunch of headlines, all over the Midwest. This is the kind of planting which will produce no crop, but which will allow the farmer to collect crop insurance at the end of the year. Returning to this picture for a moment, I want to point out that there is a compounding sort of damage from all this. You have the flooding that is preventing planting of crops. You have damages to roads, bridges, buildings, sewage systems, all kinds of things. And you have In the floodwaters, you have any kind of chemicals that are leaking out of industrial buildings that have been flooded. And you also have things like the decaying corpses of millions and millions of animals that have been killed by all this. And I've heard estimates that it may take as much as 2 years to really clean the fields to the point where they can be used again. And I wonder if that will even happen. I want to point out that those kind of problems are not just happening here. Here is what the accumulated rain for the next 10 days or so looks like in China. And you see a huge amount of rain falling in China. And if you look at the left side of the map, you see that this area is between 20 degrees and 40 degrees north latitude, which is roughly, parallel to the United States. So I would expect that they have planting and harvesting seasons that are very similar to ours, and that they are, having problems or will have problems because of this excessive moisture. There are already reports of other crop-growing areas of China going offline. We see stories about them buying land in Africa to grow crops. But, if you get into a situation where people in Africa are starving, their governments are not going to allow any food to be shipped out of those countries, even if somebody else has paid for the production of that food. This situation also affects India. Here we see on the right-hand side a large blob of rain which has probably just passed through India. It's a huge amount of rain. And on the left side, we see another big blob that is headed their way, and this is affecting them as well. Now, the point to be made about this is that for both China and India, there can be huge knock-on effects. We are very dependent on China for manufactured goods, and that includes a lot of medications that people rely on. And India is, a place where a lot of American and European IT work is done. It's a well-known phenomenon. Well, if you have disruptions of food supply in either one of these places, you will have political upheaval, and a lot of the things that we depend on could easily be damaged by that kind of social unrest. And here is a chart that shows you what is happening right now in terms of wheat prices running up. The traders were a little bit slow to pick up on what the weather was doing, and perhaps to some extent they were misled by the optimism of people who report on these things, like government agencies and some other surveyors. But at this point in time, they are fully awake, and prices are starting to climb dramatically. And wheat is the staff of life, so you can reasonably expect to see this in the price of your bread and anything that uses wheat. Okay, so here we see the price action on soybean futures in the recent time period. There's been a lot of confusion about soybeans in the markets. The Chinese saying, "Oh, we're not going to buy any soybeans from the U.S." and the farmers being, cutting back on production because of that. But the simple fact is that China can't feed itself, and they're going to need to buy soybeans from wherever they can get them. One way to understand China is to think about a quote from Sun Tzu's The Art of War, in which he advises that when you are weak, you should make yourself look strong, and when you are strong, you should make yourself look weak. So think for a moment about what kind of image China has been projecting of late. Is it an image of strength, or is it an image of weakness? And that will tell you in reverse, basically, exactly what's going on in China. And here we have a chart on the recent price of corn, and you can see here basically after not really paying much attention for a while, all of a sudden the market has gone into panic mode on the price of corn. All of this reverberates through the economy. Corn and beans are things that we feed to livestock, wisely or not. Wheat is in many, many things. So you can reasonably expect that these price increases are going to show up either in smaller portions for the same price or higher prices for the same portion. In a situation where, who knows, more than half the American people are living from paycheck to paycheck, this sounds like there's going to be a lot of strain on a lot of family budgets. So the question is, what can we do about this? In terms of the macro situation, there's not a lot we can do. I mean, this amounts to an act of God. We're just going to have to ride the wave on this, and it's going to be a very hairy ride. We need to, if nothing else, start by waking up. If you haven't been picking up on this, now's the time to pick up on this. Start watching the weather. Look at sites like Ventusky and Tropical Tidbits so you can see what's happening on a global basis. And there are other places like agroinsurance.com and Fresh Plaza where you can find, where you can track the headlines about crop losses. And if you do that, you're going to see the pattern that I've been seeing, which is of more and more and more crop losses all the time. So on a smaller scale, what you can do is grow anything you can, even if it's just a pot of lettuce, and grow more and more all the time, and try to learn how to produce something all year round instead of just having the garden season, because you're going to need everything you can grow for yourself.